Many years ago, the history of this is back when the American Boarding Kennel Association existed, there was something called the Voluntary Accreditation Standards. You could actually do a lot of the stuff they recommended, and they would come out and inspect your facility, and they would give you basically kind of a seal of approval to say you were operating safely. Back then, Susan actually led a committee of people to create those standards for the daycare industry because 20 some years ago, daycare didn't exist for which seems interesting to say that because it's so popular now. But so Susan initially led that charge, basically. I was on that committee as well, and then there were several others. When ABK went away, all those standards went away as well. So Susan and I actually, because we have been in this industry enough to know there are best practices, there are proven ways of doing this that are safer for the people and the dogs. And then there's the other part of the coin that Susan and I deal with is there are also best practices that are just business related that make sure you're profitable, make sure you're running a safe facility and running and growing a profitable business. So we have created a document many years ago called the 4 E's of Excellence, which is really best practices. It's a lot of the stuff that Susan did with ABKA, but we took it to the next level.
We made it even better.
Exactly. So I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, Susan. I was just giving that background about this being an unregulated industry, but there are proven ways of doing business that are accepted as best practices.
It was really special to work with that group of people who were all early pioneers in the industry. A lot of us came from an old Yahoo group that existed back then. And everyone was really open in sharing what went well as we learned this industry and what didn't. And I think it was a great group that we did come to consensus as to what were the best practices. And then it was fun when we started the Dog Gurus to take it to the next level. And we said, okay, this is an industry baseline, but what would make it excellent? What differentiates just doing the basics versus excellence? And that's what I think really can set your business apart, is going above and beyond industry baseline.
And then making sure people know that you're going above and beyond. A couple of industry standards that we get asked about most often. One is size of the space you need for daycare. So do you want to talk about that to begin with, Susan?
And this really has been agreed upon for a long time. And that was, I think, one of the easier ones that we all agreed on back then, is that to keep your play group safe, one thing about dogs, space is really important to them. And so as far as running dogs in play groups, having square footage per dog at 75 to 100 square foot when you're doing large or mixed size play groups is a safety standard and best practice. If you do small dogs only, that can go down to 40 square foot per dog. But if you're doing large dogs, that 75 to 100 square foot is going to keep play safer because dogs feel like they have enough space to feel safe. If you get crowded, then you will see an increase in incidents.
That has been pretty much proven over and over. So people ask, I can get more dogs in this space. And we say, yes, you can. And you're going to see that your incidents are going to go up, both staff to dog as well as dog to dog. 100% dog to dog is going to get worse because the dogs don't have enough room to feel comfortable and feel safe.
You're going to see more stress signals and they won't even play. I remember one time we did a consult, and one of the first things we did was say, take half the dogs out of this room. And it was amazing the difference in the dog behavior when we took half the dogs out of the space. You could just see they felt safe to play and engage. When there were more dogs, you saw displacement behaviors, you saw a lot of pacing, and it just proved that it is important.
Yeah, and for those that are not sure of that, I would do that experiment. I would say, what do your groups look like if you get down to that 40 to 100 square foot, depending on the size of the dog? So smaller dogs, you're going to look at 40 to 50. Larger dogs are going to look at 75 to 100, depending on the size of the dogs. What does the play look like if you get to those numbers? And if you're at a higher ratio, like you have more than that, I think you're going to see the play is totally different. I think you'll see a lot of walking around and no dogs interacting. And that's the challenge because some of the times when we go and consult, we'll look in a group and we'll be like, way too many dogs in there. And then the facility owner will say, but they're all fine. Nobody's growling, nobody's barking, nobody's biting each other. But if you look at the dogs, they're not having fun. And then when we point that out, and it's hard because we all love the dogs that come to our facility. So sometimes it just takes that third party to say, are all those dogs in that room, do they look like they're having fun? And then when you look at them, they're basically just wandering around aimlessly because they don't know what to do. And like Susan said, you usually do see a lot more displacement behavior. So that one is a huge one for us. And it does mean, because generally speaking, the reason that people go outside of those ratios is for money. So generally speaking, people will say, I can't take fewer dogs because then I'm not going to make enough money. So we would say, raise your prices. The solution is not disregard the standards. The solution is charge more and charge what is the right amount so that you can have the right ratios.
And
And
then, and then when you're giving client tours, point out that the dogs are engaging because you're following these industry standards of providing enough space so they feel safe to play and engage. Because clients don't understand, but they can see the difference. And clients, even if they don't know body language, can tell the difference between happy dogs and this kind of feeling of stressful energy, which is what you often get in those overcrowded space rooms. So just point out in your tours why that's important and why you follow those standards is so that the dogs have more fun when they come.
And then I'll also go to the other part of this, which is we gave you that size ratio depending on size of the dog. So the other non-negotiable for me and Susan is to understand what it means to mix dogs. So we would recommend that dogs of different sizes are in different groups. And basically that means 20, generally speaking, 25 pounds and under, they're in a group together, and 25 pounds and over, they're in a separate group. And even then there's a little bit of negotiation you might have to do between most daycares that we work with have dogs up to 70, 80 pounds. So those larger dogs are in their own group. We do work with a lot of people that are like, we only have one area, so we just put every dog together. And it's all I'm telling you is recognize the risk, because the risk is that you can seriously injure or kill a dog by doing that. And when you're deciding that, you just have to be aware of the potential for injury or death when you're mixing big dogs and small dogs. Those of us that have been around enough have seen enough situations where that has happened that most of us won't even risk it. It's just not worth it. I can't tell you how many emails or articles that we see on dogs that have been injured in a off-leash play environment, sometimes in a daycare, sometimes at a dog park. And every single time it was preventable. It's usually, especially when it happens at a dog park, it's usually couched as the large dog was aggressive and did this thing to the small dog. And that's very rarely the case. It's usually an instance where a small dog has done something to trigger a behavior in a large dog. And that triggering behavior causes the large dog to run and pick up the small dog and shake it and drop it. And usually it's not this big bloody mauling. It's usually like the little dog gets picked up and dies of internal injuries. And totally avoidable if you just don't mix those sizes. And so then a lot of people will then counter that with, we just screen for aggression, so that won't happen. And what I'm going to tell you is that there's a thing called predatory drift, which has nothing to do with aggression. It's a food-seeking behavior. So predatory drift is that there are times when, I won't go into the whole explanation now, but there are times when things that the dogs do can trigger a behavior of another dog. And it can happen big dog to big dog, and it can happen to little dog. It's just not as likely to end up in an injury with those scenarios. But if it happens a big dog to a little dog, you're likely to end up with a serious injury or death. So typically speaking, little dogs running, there's a reason that dogs chase squirrels. It's because squirrels look like little rodents, and they are. And little dogs can trigger that in a bigger dog. So a little dog that runs across a room can trigger a big dog to go, gotta chase. And before you know it, he's not being aggressive, but before you know it, he's caught up to the dog and picks him up. The other thing that can trigger that is that high pitched squealing. So we've all been in situations where a dog has gotten stepped on or someone stepped on their tail or whatever, and they are like, "Arr, arr, arr," making that loud noise, high pitched squealing. That can trigger another dog to go after that dog that's squealing. And same thing can happen. So that's just a huge risk with mixing sizes of dogs that we would say is really not worth it. I don't
Oh,
know.
when you first introduced me to predatory drift, it scared the crap out of me when I was operating my business. And so we pulled all of our tiny dogs out into their own play group because we had them with small dogs, and then we had some older, slower dogs in with them that didn't like our high energy groups. And I can tell you, when we pulled out our tinies and gave them their own play groups, I totally saw the play change and that it was different. And they had so much more fun. And we got to see the true personalities of those tinies. I think they don't feel safe. They know. And in fact, it has made such an impression on me because now I have JJ, who's a small dog. And so I have a 20-pound, 80-pound. I never leave the house with them together
Yeah.
because it has made such an impression on me that there's no reason to risk it. I would never forgive myself if I came home and something had happened.
The example people always then bring us whenever we present this, like separate large and small dogs, invariably someone will raise their hands and they'll go, what about the Jack Russell who's 24 pounds and he's like harassing all the little dogs? I get it. That Jack Russell, there's a lot of times when you're going to go, yeah, that dog cannot be with the little dogs. He's a tiny dog on steroids. He needs to go with the big dogs. Yeah, you're going to have some of those situations where you're going to need to make judgment calls. All Susan and I are saying is go into that totally understanding the risk involved when you are putting any little dog in with those big dogs. And it doesn't matter. It's not an aggression issue. Predatory drift, the whole reason predatory drift comes around, the naming of it is because it's a predatory behavior, not prey drive. It's a behavior that stems from the behavior of a wolf who's hunting for food. So it is not, that's the thing. That's what should scare the hell out of you is it's not an aggressive behavior. It's a food seeking behavior that is triggered in the back of a dog's mind, basically. So they're not, it's not like they are chasing a squirrel because they're like, I'm aggressive, right? Nobody who has a dog that chases things would necessarily call their dog aggressive. They would go, yeah, that dog, he loves to chase things that are moving, chasing cars, chasing bikes, chasing whatever. So some of that is prey drive, but then there's this totally separate thing that is predatory drift that can just be triggered and you might have never seen it before. You see it that one time that some little white dog runs through the room and you see a dog go flying after it. And at that point, it's too late. You just hope that the dog stops before he picks the other dog up and shakes it. So if you want to like do your own analysis of this, just start Googling injuries in dog parks. You could do injuries in daycare too, but dog parks is going to give you a lot more. The common scenario, and most of the time when a dog park injury has happened, the common scenario is small dog entered the big dog area and somehow triggered a large dog to attack them. And usually it is an injury, serious injury or death. And it happens over and over and over in the dog parks if you don't adhere to the separation of dogs in a dog park. But unfortunately, it also happens in daycare. If you have large and small dogs at home and you're like, they're fine together all the time, that is totally your prerogative. But to have that decision for every dog that is coming into your care, that's where I draw the line to say, it's if I had a small dog in with Ranger and I'm deciding that they're going to live that way together, that's one thing. I would never expect that decision to be made for me if I'm paying for someone else to take care of my dog. So that's where you really have to decide what's the right thing for your client base. There is a question. Hang on.
Okay.
Marie said, how about siblings with different sizes? Would you separate the siblings?
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
definitely in play groups and maybe even in lodging. It just depends. Like I say, when I'm not attending Archie and JJ together, I separate them to where they can't get together. And I don't think I would lodge them together just because it's in a much smaller square footage area. If the Yeah, you have to decide about lodging, but definitely in play groups, I would separate them if there's a big size difference and put them with their own sizes. And they'll probably have more fun and find better play partners if they are separated by sizes.
And honestly, a lot of the siblings that we had, even they were the same size, we
Mhm.
separated them.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes you just need to be away from your sibling. Sometimes those dogs can gang up on other dogs. So not always, but even if they're the same size, I would monitor how they play in play group because you can get dogs that will form their own little like two-person pack, two-dog pack and pick on the other dog. So sometimes they are better separated, even if they're the same size for a totally separate reason. But that's a good one.
So for you asked about how many staff to supervise the dogs. And again, this is pretty wide accepted in our industry that you should plan on one staff person for every 10 dogs in a group. Now, that could potentially go change slightly based on a couple of things: the energy level of the group of dogs and the experience level of your staff person. Meaning, a more experienced staff person may be able to safely supervise more dogs, or if you have a lower energy group, you could have more dogs in. And but I wouldn't ever get outside of probably 15 per person. Then that's just becoming too risky. And I can tell you, for some of our body slammers, the staff didn't want more than like 10 to 12 most, because it was just too stressful. There was too much activity going on.
So this is another one that when we see facilities that don't adhere to those ratios, so they have 1 to 40 dogs or 1 to 20 dogs or one, they'll say one of two things. Either their staff is just really experienced, and I get that. I've managed over 25 dogs by myself early on and thought that was awesome. I would never do that again, because as soon as you see the downside of if something bad happens, I don't care how much experience you have. If you are watching a group of more than 15 dogs and something bad happens, a fight breaks out, a dog gets hurt, whatever, you are screwed. You are not going to be able to respond and get the help quickly enough for that scenario. So the other reason, so sometimes it's just, oh, my staff's really experienced. I think that there's only experience can only take you so far. And then you have to just use common sense to say, we have to be safe for all of these people. It's almost like saying, hey, I'm a really good driver, so I could drive 150 miles an hour wherever I am because I'm a really good driver. Okay, but that ain't helping everyone else around you that you're driving around. So that's why we have speed limits. So same thing. The other reason that people often don't adhere to those standards goes back to money. So people are like, my business is not going to make money if I have to staff at one person to every 10 to 15 dogs, which we would respond, your pricing is not set right. So again, to fix that, you don't discount the standard, you fix the business side of your business, fix the pricing. And that's easy to do, especially when you can start justifying part of your higher prices is because your value is better. You're providing much better safety and security for those dogs, and they're actually going to have fun and play, and they're being monitored and supervised 100% of the time. So all that you build into your value as well.
Yep. Again, on those tours, I would be explaining to potential customers that your ratios mean it's safer for the dogs. They are able to play and have more fun, because what happens usually that people have those big groups is they don't allow any play, because that could escalate into arousal and injury. So what it becomes is just a bunch of dogs milling around, which isn't fun for anybody. And it's very stressful on the staff. I think you'll have lower staff turnover if you adhere to those standards, which again will save you expenses. And it also makes your clients feel good when they see staff that they know.
Yeah. So Ellen said, in the post-COVID world, I now got to lower my ratios, and it's great. My staff is loving it. My stress level is down, and it's great. So that's the other thing, is it is a lot better for your staff to have those lower ratios. It's because, let's be honest, those staff, they're in charge of a whole lot of lives when you put that one staff member and think about if something happens. Nobody hires staff that doesn't like dogs. So if you get an injury on a staff member's watch, they're going to feel horrible about it. It's stressful. It's very stressful to be responsible for that many animals.
Mhm.
And then to expect to do it safely. So your staff is going to be happier with smaller numbers. For those that have been around for the last 5 years, Susan and I have actually been making a push to go towards enrichment based daycare, which is what we call Daycare 2.0, which is smaller groups, more enrichment activities, less day long play, and more of a structure. So that model anyway is built on the premise that you're going to have smaller groups, like groups of 6 to 8, and then that you're also going to build in enrichment activities where you're working one-on-one or in small groups with the dogs doing fun activities. So it's not just day long play, which was the model that existed for many years. That model, you also can charge more. So if you're still doing the day long play concept where someone drops their dog off, they get put in a play group, they're in that play group all day, with the exception of maybe a rest period or two, I would look at just changing your model. And this is a great time to do it. If you go to our YouTube channel, we've got other videos out about Daycare 2.0 and how that works. But it's a really good way to do exactly what Ellen just said. Smaller groups, you're going to add more enrichment based activities. The staff are going to love it because they actually now get to play with the dogs more, and you charge a higher price point. So you actually need fewer dogs to make more money.
We also can have less space and make more money.
Yeah, so that's the other thing, is it doesn't take as much space. And if you have those of you who have your lodging enclosures, which are all sitting empty right now, by and large, you can also double the amount of dogs and just rotate them and have them in rest periods in your lodging enclosures right now. So it's a whole new way of looking at how to generate revenue from the space that you have. So Brian said the UK has a licensing system with a 1 to 10 maximum ratio. There are a few states now that are starting to implement ratios like that as well. And not many, but a few states are starting to do that as well. And then Jess says enrichment is the future of pet care. I honestly do think enrichment is the future of pet care. When Susan and I started promoting our concept of Daycare 2.0, which I guess was 5 or 6 years ago now, we were doing that because it was better for the dogs and it was better for your staff and it was better for your business. So dogs are having more fun, staff was having more fun, you were making more money as the business owner. Those were our 3 reasons for doing it. But now it has turned into demand from clients. So today's savvy pet parent actually wants that kind of one-on-one attention for their dog. So it's actually now starting to turn into more of the norm. So again, for those of you that have been in business for years, that might still be a foreign concept to you, but I would definitely be looking at going that direction. So that is where the industry is going. I definitely agree with that. Kimberly said she loves enrichment-based daycare. The only type I recommend. That's actually what we recommend. If we recommend that if you're starting out, we wouldn't even do day-long play. We would only do enrichment daycare. If you have an existing business, we would tell you to convert your existing business. But we also know that's a huge step. So for most of the people that we work with, we help them create an implementation plan where they're basically adding enrichment as a VIP or membership option while they're still doing the regular daycare, with the goal that eventually a lot of those clients will end up converting to enrichment only. So I would definitely look at that. All right. So Marie also said we have smaller groups now rotating throughout the day, implementing enrichment on Mondays. So that's awesome. So that's a great way to get started with that, and then rotating the groups. And then Deb said for big dogs, we use lodging runs as a base for daycare, playtime scheduled in the play area, which is, then this is a great way to use your facility for those that have those lodging runs that aren't being as used as normal right now because of COVID. It's a great way to incorporate those lodging enclosures, and you can take dogs and then use those as rotation. So that's awesome too. Jess said we put together enrichment calendar templates and suggestions. So are you going to give those out, Jessica?
This is our friend Jess from Blue Nine.
from Blue Nine.
Highly recommend the climb as part of your enrichment equipment. We have a Daycare 2.0 toolkit that helps you walk through and make a plan, because usually there's a combination of rest, individual activities, small group play, and a lot of rest, because all day play for dogs can also be overtiring. So your staff can also rotate through doing different activities, including individual or group, so they can handle more dogs that way. But again, charging more, because anything that's more a smaller group or one-on-one costs more, and clients understand that. If you think about a gym, if you go to a big gym, big group classes, the cost is lower. But if you go to a smaller gym that has smaller classes or even one-on-one training, you pay more. So people understand that concept. So you may be able to actually add a staff member, but based on how much more you're charging, you still are going to make higher profits. And we have seen that with many of our clients that have implemented enrichment, is even if they're adding staff, they're making more money because they're charging more because of the type of activities that are being offered. You also can create a career path for staff so that they maybe start out with doing the big groups or smaller groups and then go to individual. So you have better retention, which saves costs, because it's really tiring and stressful to manage those big groups of dogs that we talked about earlier. So having another option is a great way to keep staff interested. And what we like to say, it's a career path to possibly getting into training, because a lot of the activities we recommend for enrichment are based on doing obedience, fun things, tricks. And so it is a good segue into people potentially getting a career in dog training.
Yeah, and that's how we started. If you look at Pet Guru College, which is our training program, we start out with daycare counselor as a role, and then an additional role on top of that would be an enrichment counselor. So now that person who you brought in at a base level, it's a way to say, hey, if you keep working with us, you can get up here. For a lot of the facilities, their enrichment counselor role is a higher paid position. It's also way more fun for the staff, which means they usually want to get there. And then the next step after that, like Susan said, is that person now may show the interest to say, hey, this can become eventually our trainer at our facility. So you can add a training revenue stream as well. So it is a great way and for those of you that have heard us talk about staffing, creating those positions in a way that there is growth available helps to keep your staff engaged and wanting to work in your facility. So it's not just a warm body that you're just going to be like, go watch the dog. There's a mission and purpose there. So that's definitely another advantage to that. Getting back to standards, some of the other stuff in terms of design and safety that you want to talk about, Susan.
I think for daycare, one of the things I definitely think about are double gates between the areas where the dogs are playing off leash and any area outside the facility, whether it's an indoor playroom or an outdoor playroom, getting outside a fenced area, having double doors and gates. And then also fence heights and security, and always making sure you check, especially like outdoor spaces, before you let dogs out, to make sure that the gate's still secure. There's been no foreign things thrown into the yard, or that somehow a gate's been propped open. Because I think, Robin, you have a story about that happening to you.
Gosh, yes. This is like one of my most memorable, horrifying experiences as a daycare owner. I had at that time, my second facility, I was in a shopping center, and in the back, attached to our door, we had an outdoor area that was fenced in the back of the shopping center. So we had gotten into the habit of just opening the door, because the door led into the play yard. So when we were going to let the dogs out, we would just walk up, open the door, all the dogs would go out. So I was the one working the floor that day, and I did that. It was first thing in the morning. We had a bunch of dogs come in, and then it was time for them to have a potty break. So open the door, all the dogs ran out. I stepped out after them. There was not a single dog. I just let out like 15 dogs. There was not a single dog in the yard, because the yard gate had been busted open, and we actually had a lock on that gate. This was why I never checked the gate, because when we had our fire inspection, we did not have a lock on that gate because you weren't allowed to. by law, there had to be an egress out of that fenced in area. So we had no lock. As soon as the fire marshal left, I put a lock on that. And the key was hanging right next to it. So it wasn't like if a fire happened, the key was right next to the lock. But I did put a lock on it because I was afraid that dogs would jump up and hit the latch because there was a specific latch we had to have for safety as well. So I never bothered to check it because in my mind it was locked. It was never going to be open until something happened the night that prior night and somebody had smashed the gate in and the lock was still on the gate, but the gate was open. And all the dogs had run out of the gate and down, basically down to where semis turn around because it was the back of a shopping center. Horrifying. Long story short is we made our policy that the people go out first and do exactly what Susan said, walk the perimeter, make sure nothing's been thrown in there, which that really wasn't a problem for us ever, and then make sure the gate is locked. So we got the dogs back because we had always done lots of crazy games with the dogs. So I basically just acted like a total lunatic. Everyone come back here, we're having so much fun. They all came running back and ran right into the yard. And I had a heart attack and closed the door. And after that, we changed our policy. But yeah, the gates, that how you're managing those outdoor areas. I have seen places where people throw stuff into the yards.
Yeah, there's a whole example of that. Somebody was escaping from police and threw some kind of drug into a daycare play area, and the dog did get it. They had to take it to the veterinarian.
Yeah, so that making those policies. In terms of gate height, we typically recommend a minimum of 6 feet. Outside, you might look at 8 feet, depending on what all is around. So if basically the height of my fence would be directly proportional to what happens if they get out. Susan and I were talking about this with some of we've seen a couple daycares that are on like rooftops. I don't know if I'd want to have a daycare on a rooftop. But if I did, I would have an 8-foot fence because the risk of a dog getting out and falling off the roof, I don't know. I don't think I could handle that. But
I would have angled in top as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to look at that. But we would say bare minimum 6 feet as a minimum. And then the other thing is note there are behaviors that dogs go through when they are going to try to escape. And you have to teach your staff those. So two of the most common is that dogs that are really like, I want to get out of here, they'll get into the yard and they'll start walking the perimeter. And they'll usually look down and look up, which is not normal dog behavior. Think about how many dogs you've ever seen that just go along a fence line doing this. It's not really normal. So if you see a dog doing that, I would immediately leash them and take them inside. And then they only go out with a long line. Obviously, questioning the owner, is your dog a flight risk and that kind of thing is helpful, but sometimes the owner doesn't know. But so I would be teaching the staff about those behaviors as well. Some dogs, if they decide they're jumping, they can scale a fence faster than you're gonna be able to catch them. So you really want to be watching for those dogs that show that type of, I want to get out of here behavior. And it's not because they're unhappy. It's just that grass is always greener on the other side. So I'd be looking at that. And then there are other things you can do. Susan said angled in. Jess had put a note about Coyote Rollers. So Coyote Rollers are basically putting a roller on a wire so that if the dog's feet touches, it spins. I know some facilities that have built those in. So if a dog does try to jump, they can't get any traction to actually get over the fence. So things like that are options as well.
And also just doing physical inspection on your gates and posts because things shift. I know some really responsible facility owners that had escapes because a really small dog, an Italian Greyhound, squeezed between a post that had over time separated a little bit. Things shift with the ground. Make sure that they can't dig under, and things do shift. So just building in those regular inspections to make sure things are still secure is just a industry best practice.
Excellent. Yeah, and so I was never worried about, because my outdoor area was fenced in on cement and asphalt because it was in the back of that shopping center. I was never worried about digging under, but we did drill rebarb into the ground and had the fence basically laced over the rebarb, because what we did have is dogs that could push the fence out. We also couldn't bury the fence in the ground, which a lot of people will do if they're on dirt or sand or whatever, is they'll bury the fence in the ground so the dog can't dig out or dig under. But we weren't able to do that. Materials that you're using it obviously needs to be safe for dogs. So when you're going to install something like fencing or whatever, whatever you're going to build to contain or create structures, it all has to be safe for dogs. And what I mean by that is there are different level gauges of wire. Some are smoother than others. So making sure that you're talking to your installer about that, because I'm telling you, dogs slam their bodies into everything. And so wire that is, sometimes you'll find cheaper fencing, but the reason it's cheaper is because there's nothing on it to smooth it out. There's might not be any kind of rubber coating on it or whatever. Like all of those are going to affect your price, but this is an area where cheaper isn't necessarily better either. So you also want to make sure that it is a grade of wire that is basically meant to be. It's the same stuff they use on playgrounds. So it's not just industrial wire that a dog's going to cut themselves on if they run up against it or that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I want to talk about enclosures. That the best enclosures go all the way to the ground and are sealed so that you don't have any cross contamination of waste, or dogs can't reach each other between enclosures and bite paws or tails. All of these things have happened. So best practice is your enclosure sides go all the way to the ground so that it's just safer.
Yeah, and we always would recommend having at least one or two enclosures that are covered.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you will have some dogs that can climb out of those enclosures, not a lot of them, but when you have them, you need a place to put them, because you'll find that out in the middle of the night that, he can climb over the fence and he's messing around with all the other dogs or whatever. So have some enclosures that are completely enclosed. You don't have to have all of them that way, but I would have one or two that if you get really a Houdini dog in there, you can put in that enclosure and keep them safe for that as well. So Michaela has asked, what kind of flooring do you recommend? This is one of our most common questions. We could do a whole video on this.
Yes,
we currently have epoxy, but the dogs slip easily on it. Do you want to start with that, Susan?
I'll start with that. I'll start with there are no perfect flooring options for indoor or outdoor. So you just have to pick what works best for your scenario and the services and what's going to happen in the space. So on indoor, we definitely like a rubber flooring. So especially a play space where dogs may be jumping, running, sliding to a stop. So the rubber flooring that can be sealed is really good for that. Permatech has a good flooring that has some cushion to it, but can go up the sides and dovetail, which is good for play space. And then, do you have anything else on indoor before we go to outdoor?
No, the two most common for indoor, Permatech is basically like a liquid rubber in a way. It's a poured on floor that is not porous, which is obviously great because you want to be able to clean and disinfect it. And then it does have that cove base Susan's talking about, where it goes up the side of the wall a few inches or however many inches you want. So that if, like, I had two of my places had drywall. And so if a dog pees on the wall, which they will, it theoretically could go underneath the wall. So we had a cove base on all of that, so that couldn't happen. So Permatech is great for that. So I would check that out. And then I like rubber flooring, which RB rubber has been industry standard for a long time, but really look at if there's any kind of place around you that sells horse stall mattings. That's really what it is. It's really thick mats or rolls. They have it in rolls now too, of different thicknesses. And those are probably my two favorite ones for inside. If you're going to do any kind of sports like agility, fly ball, anything where the dogs are really running and jumping, you definitely need to have something that's cushioning for the dogs. So
now in our lodging enclosures, we had sealed concrete, but we did have a few with rubber matting in that we could put senior dogs or dogs with arthritis that had trouble standing or just special needs dogs. We did have that. Outdoor space, play space, potty areas. Again, there's no perfect, but I do like the artificial turf for play areas. You do have to be careful, really hot areas. I know people that put in sprinklers for their artificial turf in hot areas because of the sensitivity to the touch. Sometimes you may want to do a mixture in really high traffic areas, some type of pea gravel or mulch, and then grass if you have enough space and can rotate. But grass is really hard to keep going in outdoor spaces.
Yeah, grass is great for a few months and then it's mud or
Yeah.
dirt, depending on your environment. I really like that the artificial turf canine grass, which is very well known in the daycare industry and the for boarding facilities. So you can check them out. And the other options we've seen some people that do dirt, some people that do mulch. We've seen some people that do pea gravel. We see some people that do
Rubber mulch?
all of those have pros and cons. The biggest thing you want to look at is long term, what do you have to do to keep it up? And this is the same for indoor as well, but long term, what's the maintenance look like? So if you have something like pea gravel or mulch, then you are going to have to put that on some kind of replacement schedule because it will wear out basically, and you'll get lower and lower amounts. And then once a year or once every 6 months or whatever, depending on your facility and how much you have and how many dogs you have, you're going to have to add more to that. Other downsides with pea gravel is you will have a period of time where dogs get paws that are really sore. There is a little bit of education for pet parents with their dogs go home limping. So that can be a downside. And I think fewer and fewer people are doing that now because
Yeah.
I feel like that was normal 20 years ago. Where
Right.
people were like, hey, your dogs are just going to limp, whatever. I feel like pet parents will not accept that as well now. So part of that has been a little change in the people using daycare or boarding and lodging and daycare services. So I feel like that's less of a good option. But like Susan said, the other thing is you don't have to do everything all at once. Like you could say, we're going to start with this area with artificial turf, and then maybe along the edges, you're going to have pea gravel where the dogs are going to maybe go there to go to the bathroom, but not hang out there. And then you could have another area of mulch. There's a lot of options, but ultimately it does come down to how much area are you trying to cover, and then look at a 5-year investment. Don't just say 1 year of pea gravel versus 1 year of artificial turf.
Yeah.
It's going to be like that's way expensive. That artificial turf, there's no way. But if you look at over a 5-year period of time, because artificial turf you're putting in once and you're probably never going to do anything with it again. The other things you may have to replace multiple times.
Or you may have to give a lot of free baths away.
That was the other thing. I did have a couple of our clients who didn't like dusty or dirty dogs.
Yeah.
So some of that is going to be based on your clientele too, because if you do mulch or sand, you will have dogs that are going home dirty. And again, I feel like more people are not going to be happy with that unless you just include a bath when they're
Right.
going from
Which you
daycare.
got to include that in your pricing. And then there are also dogs that will eat gravel or mulch, which is a health risk. So you do have to consider that as well.
Yeah, we had our biggest issue with mulch is we had dogs that would resource guard it. And it's everywhere, but they would pick like one piece and they'd be like, I'm gonna resource guard this one piece.
Of mulch.
Like, well, let me take that from them. But then naturally they'd go find another piece. But it was weird. We had a lot of dogs that would resource guard mulch. Susan, was any kind of red flags that your facility might be operating in a kind of a danger zone? So anything you want to talk about with that?
Yeah, we actually did a survey a few years back because we were just curious on accident and injury rates. And it was very educational. But what we learned from that is if you're having more than 2 incidents a year that require a dog or a staff person to seek medical care, you would be below industry standard. That as far as care quality and safety, most businesses that are doing group play only had 2 or less incidents a year that require medical treatment for a staff member or for a dog. So that was our basis of setting that standard. And if you're having more than that, then what we would say in group play to look at is the process you're using to evaluate the dogs that you're accepting into daycare. And we do have an online course that can help you with that. And then the other thing is, how are you training your staff to understand canine body language and play so that they are being proactive and preventing incidents? So those are if you're having more, the solution is out there. Just look at your dog evaluation process and your staff training process. And of course, we have Knowing Dogs and Pet Guru College and a lot of tools that can help you with that as well.
One of our soapbox issues are the people who will just assume that dogs are going to get hurt and that's normal. And they'll have multiple situations where dogs are going to the staff, or dogs are going to the vet, or the staff is going to get urgent treatment for an injury. That should not be the norm. But I can't tell you how many folks that Susan and I over the years have worked with. And again, if you don't believe me, Google injuries in dog daycares and then listen to the conversation that the owner has with the reporter when they are interviewed. They aren't always interviewed, but when they are interviewed, it's usually something to the effect of, dogs are here and they're just going to get hurt. And so this is just to be expected. And these are for injuries that required like massive sutures or a death or drains and stitches and everything else. Like, I do agree that to some extent, because we often use the analogy of it's like kids in a playground where they're going to get skin knees. Yes, but I'm not taking my child to the emergency room for a skin knee. So yes, I do think there's some risk when dogs are playing off leash that they might get a slight injury equivalent to a skin knee. But when you're looking at more than 2 times a year, you are taking a dog in for medical attention, then I would say there's more work you could do to resolve that so that it limits it. And it usually revolves around exactly what Susan said. Are you taking the right dogs in? Do you have a good dog evaluation process? And is your staff trained? Because that's the way to solve those 2 problems.
And we recently did a Facebook Live on evaluating dogs, and that's on our YouTube channel. So if you missed that one, you can watch it and get some tips on how to maybe improve your evaluation process.
So Karen said, does it depend on the size of the facility?
We did try to see if there's a trend based on size, and not really, because I think it comes back to once you have these key systems set up and training programs set up, it really doesn't matter the size.
What matters is whether or not you're evaluating the right dogs and whether or not you're training the staff. Because if you have a small facility, we've seen small facilities that have a lot of incidents because those 2 things aren't in place. And we've seen large facilities that have 0 incidents because all those procedures are in place. We just really don't think it matters. And that is an issue with us, is when people are just dismissive about it and assuming that's normal. I literally worked with someone one time where I ran into her at a conference. And so she was asking what I do, and we got to talking and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she was asking about the daycare, and it was winter. So we had long sleeves on. And I remember talking to her and I was like, no, like, our dogs are so, like, they're crazy. They just get really rowdy. And I'm like, yeah, dogs in playgroup, they get really rowdy. And she literally is, no, look. And she rolled up her sleeves and her arms were covered with bruises from being jumped on and bruises from being bitten. Not puncture bites, but just bitten hard enough to cause a bruise. And she said, is this normal? I was like, no, that is totally not normal. But she didn't know it wasn't normal. So I gave her a lot of tips to take back to her facility owner, but that's not normal. Your staff should not be getting injured and the dog should not be getting injured. Those are easy to fix problems. That's the good news. But it does mean you have to train your staff and have to evaluate your dogs.